Good morning, everyone. I'm Eric Budd. Christopher Chapman is with me here today. We're having an exciting time learning this new platform along with you, and we're very pleased that you're here to join us today. We have two portions of our session that we'll go through. The first is a standing item on our agenda for these Learn Then Lead sessions, which is something from the IQI Academy. And last time we did a presentation, a capstone presentation from a recent academy. We're going to do that again. I'm going to share my screen, and in your controls, you should be able to enlarge the screen when it's playing so you can have a good view of this. This is self-explanatory as far as who it is. So I'm going to start our video here in just a second. And then we'll conclude in about 8.5 minutes after this video with that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gloria, and I'm a study coordinator at LabCorp. Before I participated in IQI, I hadn't really realized the power and ability that everyone had to initiate change. And I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned these past few months. Through various assignments that encouraged me to talk to our leadership, I realized that our management is actually very receptive to process improvement and extremely supportive of staff who are willing to propose alternatives or solutions to processes within our system. So if there's one thing I'd love for everyone to take away today, it's that limits in the face of inaction are created by the individual. And as Deming states in his 14th point for management, it's everyone's job to transform the organization. So IQI taught me the importance of viewing my organization as a system, the network of interdependent components working together to achieve a single aim. Because usually we're too focused on our singular position or department, so we don't realize the effect we may have on key stakeholders in other departments when we propose change or improvement. So for example, a proposed improvement may be beneficial to one component of the system, but may bring negative effects to others. Improvements should be made with the common aim of the system in mind, not necessarily for the benefit of one specific department, as it can have a net negative impact on the system. So one tool that I found particularly useful in identifying key stakeholders to avoid impacting the system negatively is a deployment flowchart. Deployment flowcharts articulate the steps in a process while identifying all parties involved. So this was the first deployment flowchart that I created for my IQI project, but I realized the value in creating such a visual for process improvement proposals. So as you can see here, I started to create them for other projects and presentations outside of IQI, because after all, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So through my IQI project, I also learned the process to making meaningful improvements using the 3 basic questions and PDSA cycles. The 3 basic questions forced me to be very specific and to identify quantifiable measures of success. So for example, the box highlighted in red is my first attempt at answering these questions without any guidance, whereas the answers in the green box are my answers after only 1 week of class. My answers had become more concise, and they eliminate vague, non-quantifiable words such as enforce, increase, and improve. Through my PDSA cycles, I had to come to terms with the fact that being correct about my predictions was not the goal of these improvement cycles. PDSA cycles don't really have like a clear black and white right answer. In fact, the goal of PDSA cycles is to learn. So any new observations or predictions that I may have discovered became the correct answer. By doing so, the focus of my project actually slowly shifted. I originally started my project with the goal of promoting the use of our pre-existing Outlook calendars because I had assumed a lack of reservations was what was causing a scheduling conflict for limited resources such as equipment and space. However, through my cycles, I began to realize that scheduling conflicts were not as common as I had originally assumed, and I learned the importance of identifying a tool's job to be done before improvements were made. So originally we learned about identifying one's job to be done through this customer chain exercise that you guys have all seen now, because it outlines each person's unique contributions and role in a system. So for example, the job to be done by a study manager at LabCorp is different than the job to be done by our clients at pharma companies. But both of our aims is to develop efficacious treatments for cancer patients. I actually ended up applying this concept to my project because my PDSA cycles were indicating that the job to be done by two scheduling tools that my department was using was overlapping. So for example, this table right underneath my exercise is just a quick draft of what I heard was supposed to be the intended job to be done for our two different scheduling tools. But currently, the dosing book that's listed on the left is also being used to visually show capacity at each time, which is supposed to be the job of the bubble calendar. This can create confusion and repetitive work because now staff don't know which one to use in order to provide clear communication regarding their schedules. And this is an example of what happens when improvements are made without first identifying the intended job to be done of resources used. And this was super ironic because I was actually the one who proposed the improvements made to the dosing book to increase capacity visibility. So basically I shot myself in the foot 6 months before IQI. So I finally got to see what happens when one makes improvements with and without IQI knowledge. Aside from all these lessons on process improvement in the organization, IQI has also taught me a lot about myself. I found out that I learn best when I actively try to apply concepts to my daily work, and I enjoyed the Teach to Learn assignments as they helped me to facilitate unique conversations with my coworkers that introduce new ideas. This ended up being a little dangerous for me though, because through these discussions, I got overzealous and rapidly filled up my plate with a plethora of projects. I learned that I have a difficult time prioritizing when I get too passionate about certain projects and can lose track of time. Thankfully, my style of work hasn't been a huge barrier to my current position, but I have found that it's not compatible with the tight deadlines that I encountered through IQI. IQI was extremely fast-paced and assignment-heavy, which was super challenging for me. So I found myself doing the bare minimum for certain assignments just to get through them. However, I think I had a unique experience that also allowed me to maximize my IQI experience because my study coordinator position is based on process improvement and development. So I was given a lot of freedom by my manager and our group leads to apply the concepts that I was learning to almost any process that I was passionate about at the time. Sorry, you can actually move on another slide. So here are some of my next few steps that I had in mind for my learning. The first is to reread Deming's The New Economics by the end of this month to see if I read it a little bit differently now that I've participated in IQI. Additionally, as a bookworm, I've kind of been eyeing a few books that Eric has been suggesting to us throughout our sessions. And so I'm planning on starting Six Thinking Hats by Edward de Bono, as it's advertised as the multi-million best-selling guide to running better meetings and making faster decisions. Regarding my project, I would like to redo my control chart to quantifiably identify if I have a stable system and create a template for our Outlook calendar so that they contain more consistent information. And then lastly, for my organization, I hope to continue to help promote a culture of transformation by following up with all the projects that I've started in the past few months and to make sure that improvement is continuous. And I'll also offer a Q&A session with LabCorp participants for the next session of IQI to help provide accurate insight into what to expect and hopefully tips that will make their session a little less challenging. So thank you so much for making the time to attend our presentations, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Well, there you have it. Those of you who are interested in participating in the next IQI Academy, the fall session starts on September 12th. The registration deadline is August 31st because there's pre-work to be accomplished. And the earlier you register, the easier it is to accomplish the preparations that you'll want to accomplish for our session. I'm going to turn things over to Chris now. Chris Chris Chapman is one of our newest board members for the IQI Academy. He's a consultant working out of Toronto, Canada, and writes the Digestible Deming blog, which is one of the better blogs out there, focused on Deming and learning from Dr. Deming. So Chris, thank you.
Thanks very much. We've taken half of my introduction away. That's okay. Let me just get this a little bit bigger here so we can go into full presentation mode. Right, so as Eric was saying, I'm based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. A little bit more about me, for the folks who don't know me very well, is I used to be a software developer, and I turned into a team management coach probably around the year 2010. And I've spent my career, 20 years of it, in the software development industry, working closely, with software development teams and their management teams, and then shifted my focus probably in the past 6 years to work with leadership, especially because I was finding that a lot of the changes I was trying to sustain inside of teams couldn't happen just at the team level. It had to involve a conversation with leadership. As Eric was saying, I've started publishing the Digestible Deming newsletter. I'm coming up on my first anniversary, which will be the 21st of July, and I hope to have a new post out. I've been working with a new customer, so I've been very, very busy and distracted from my usual twice-a-week postings, but I have over 60. And the Digestible Deming newsletter, I started as an effort to jumpstart conversations with some of my customers and teams, because I was finding that there were little parts of Dr. Deming's wisdom that I would want to dispense to them. So each one of the posts you'll find focuses on a particular theme or topic, like intrinsic motivation, or perhaps understanding the effects of management by objective or management by results. So I encourage you to check it out if you need some similar inspiration for starting conversations with your teams. I'm also the past founder of a meetup here in Toronto that was called Systems Thinking TO. And that was where we gathered once a month to have pizza, beer, and talk about Deming, ACOF, Goldrat, and many other things. And of course, the pandemic put an end to that, but we're hoping to get restarted again. Hopefully, I think this September, we're going to see. And as I've mentioned, I'm currently engaged full-time with an Internet of Things company called Belena.io that you can check out. So we're going to play Moving Motivators today, an exercise that was developed by a fellow by the name of Jurgen Apollo. And he is from the Netherlands, and he created a system of management. It's called Management 3.0, and it comes from his background experience in startups and trying to manage and lead startups. And he became very curious about some of the things that would accelerate how the companies worked and would decelerate them. And this, I think, is one of his more interesting inventions, where he looks at how do individuals' intrinsic motivations and extrinsic motivations working upon them, how do we begin to share that with groups? And we know from what Dr. Deming would explain to us that intrinsic motivation was incredibly important, but as sagacious as he was, he didn't give us a distinct roadmap on, well, how do we tap into that? How do we understand how our teams think about what intrinsically motivates them? So this is an exercise that brings that to the fore. And it does that by looking across 10 different motivators. We're going to get into them in just a little bit more detail. So for the context of the exercise, and especially if you were to do this with your own teams, you'd want to level set with, well, what do we mean by intrinsic motivation? And for both Jurgen and I think for Dr. Deming, we would say people's innate desires to do well. It's their eagerness for self-control and self-direction in accomplishing their objectives. And so Dan Pink, probably you're very familiar with Dan Pink's triumvirate of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, really encapsulate that. It's what makes us want to take on challenges. It's what pulls us through each day to see something through to the end. Now, in contrast, extrinsic motivation, Dr. Deming says, well, this can be quite negative. It characterizes how the traditional or the prevailing style of management works to manipulate people through submission to external forces, which neutralize, and he even uses the word, I think, extinguish intrinsic motivation. But he does acknowledge that some is necessary to build your own self-esteem, to be able to help you at least establish a foothold towards improving yourself. Commonly, though, we would say extrinsic motivation is pay, bonuses, rewards, other types of inducements that we would use to control someone's behavior or direct them to do what we want them to do. So we've got the Moving Motivators play sheet. I'm going to give you a copy of your own, and I'm going to explain how this works. We're going to step through these. I'm going to have to drop out of presentation mode so we can zoom in, but I'm going to get you your own. I'm going to drop a link into the chat so that you can play along, and I hope that you do. So let me just pop this over into the chat. And let me know if you can, or this should be an open link. So you should be able to view that and download your own copy so that you can work on it yourself. It does require a Google connected account. But if you do not, then just watch what I'm going to do here and we can go through the exercise. So Moving Motivators, what Jürgen did is rather ingenious. He took 10 motivation signals, intrinsic motivation signals, that come from 3 different thinkers. So we've got Dan Pink, who wrote Drive. We have Stephen Rice, who's a psychologist. He passed away in 2016, but he did a lot of work on intrinsic motivation. And we have Edward Deci, who is the professor of psychology at University of Rochester. Again, someone who's done a lot of research into what motivates us intrinsically. But each one of these is either totally an intrinsic motivator, or it could be an extrinsic motivator, or it could be some of both. And it forms an acronym. So you'll notice that right across here, it's arranged in a particular home state. And this is usually what I do when I facilitate this with teams. It goes by the acronym CHAMP frogs. So that's why there was a frog, by the way, in our other slide. So I'm going to zoom in on these so that you can see what each of the motivators means. And this is really important. When you decide to do this, if you decide to do it with your teams, you want to go through these because if you do just too quick of a gut reaction on the highlighted words, you're going to misinterpret what the motivator is actually driving at. So we have curiosity, meaning I have plenty of things to investigate and think about. Honor, I feel proud that my personal values are reflected in how I work. Acceptance, the people around me approve of who I am and what I do. Mastery, this one is often prevalent in tech companies. My work challenges my competence, but is still within my abilities. Here is one that's widely misinterpreted. Power. There is enough room for me to influence what happens around me. Some folks interpret this to mean I have power over others, and that's not what it means. So it's very important that this one is carefully thought about by participants. Next, we have freedom. I am independent of others with my own work and responsibilities. Next, we have relatedness. I have good social contacts with the people in and around my work. Ooh. Zoom back out there. Going too close. Order, an interesting one. There are enough rules and policies for a stable environment. Next, we have goal. My purpose in life is reflected in the work that I do. And then finally, we have status. My position is good and recognized by the people who work with me. So I'm going to zoom this back out. So the task that you have, if you have been able to download this sheet, I'm just going to manipulate this maybe down to this size, is to arrange these, to consider these in the context of yourself and your personal life, your work life, to arrange them in an order that reflects what motivates you most and what motivates you least. So in the sheet itself, you're able to pick up the individual motivator cards and you're able to maneuver them around. So for example, for myself, I find curiosity, mastery, and sometimes power as being important. So I might move those in that direction. I'll rearrange my motivators. I'm going to see what I can do here. Status is probably the least motivating for me. So I'm going to probably put that down towards the end. Maybe honor will go there. I'll grab these three, and I'm going to move them perhaps up here. So if you're able to, let me just drop back into the chat here. Yes, Eric's offered some good advice. Duplicate the slides so that the original is as provided, so that you can come back and you can look at this differently. So what I would ask is for the folks who are here participating, I'm going to give you a few minutes to contemplate and to arrange your own personal motivators. And I will show you a little bit about how to proceed with that. So I'll give you a few minutes to just consider that and maybe ask questions. If you have them, you can pop them into the chat. I don't know if we have the ability for folks to raise hands and ask a question with audio, but I'll keep an eye on the chat and see how well folks are doing. Oop. There we go. So if anyone is having any difficulties with getting the file to work, if you could please let us know. I'm going to move into some conversation, but first I'd like to ask from some of the participants, of those who've completed the exercise so far, what was that like for you, putting those motivators into order? What decisions were you making? Which ones stood out to you? Oh, we have a technical problem.
Christopher, I have a suggestion. This might help. We could go back to table mode, have people talk there, and then we can call them up and they can speak if you want to do it that way. Just a suggestion, or if you have another way you want to approach it.
Oh, it's just that I think Adrian's got the right idea here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you just want to do it by chat. That's fine.
Yeah, chat's fine. It
Okay.
keeps it brief. So I like what Adrian has said here. My choices changed depending upon what job I was thinking of doing. Adrian makes a perfect point. This is a snapshot in time. This is not who you are forever and always. It's going to be contextual. So when you decide to do this exercise, it's going to be framed very much in how people are feeling and thinking at the moment. So that's good. Frank says, I tended to order them pairwise, but I think it worked well. Okay. Oh, and I see that Sneha, I'm unable to arrange it on the file, but I have the idea on it. Okay, so if you are able to do, maybe you haven't been able to duplicate the file, but if you duplicate it, you would be able to edit it so that you could change that. Yeah, because it's view only. When you see it through the browser, it's going to be view only. You have to duplicate or make a copy of the file so that you can actually edit it and move the motivators around. But you get the general idea. So the next part of the exercise is to think about how change affects your motivators. So this is where it gets interesting when you're working with a team. Usually you want to do this exercise as part of or a lead into maybe something that is going to be impacting the team or impacting the organization in some way. So think about interesting questions that could be asked about a pending change that's going to be happening. And in our case, we could construct a number of different ideas on those questions. So how about a decision of whether you want to attend the fall IQI Academy? You're going to make you're probably going to have to make a pitch for getting funding or for getting time to do this, getting some leadership buy-in. What does that do to your particular motivators? Taking on leadership roles to start a Deming transformation. How about delivering a session to teach fundamentals to others? How about moving to a new department or division because you think there's going to be stronger interest in what you have to offer? Traditional reorgs. Maybe you've got a round of mid-year performance appraisals to do. How do your motivators get affected? How about fighting for funding at a budget committee meeting or having to do the routine work of overseeing paid time off and leave requests or approving requests for learning materials and attending conferences? So the way that this works in the exercise now is to look at thinking of a particular question. Move the motivators that are impacted positively, and they could be any of them. You would move them above the line, the neutral line. Any of them that get motivated negatively, you would say get pulled below the line for a particular change. Now, what becomes interesting is the discussion around why these motivators moved in certain directions. Why did they go up in certain cases? Why did they get pulled down? How aligned are we? What this does, if you are in a group that is able to share and discuss these freely, is it's making suddenly things that traveled under the radar and were quite latent and invisible, it makes them much more apparent. And we're able to have conversations around, well, if I'm motivated by, let's say, freedom, curiosity, I'm going to move power down here maybe. Freedom, curiosity, and mastery. And if I find myself being approached, for example, to do things that are much more rigidly defined, things that are going to impinge on my freedom, mastery, and curiosity, now I have an indication about why my behaviors might change as I'm going through trying new patterns of leadership or working with new policies and procedures. However, if I was to say, well, maybe what we're looking at is changing towards self-serve time off, so that as long as you are assuring that you're not leaving your teammates in the lurch, you can take as much time as you need without having to request approval. What is that going to do, for example, for freedom? Well, it might push that up a little bit more because it's going to have a positive impact. So that's one way to summarize or work with this. Now, each of you is probably going to have different questions that you're going to be putting this towards. So you're going to have different ideas. If you have some things that you wanted to pop into the chat about what might have been moved positively or negatively for you. I see Kathy's got a great comment here. I like that I was able to approach this from a personal perspective. Absolutely. 100%. All right, so now I'm going to show you another way to summarize or to show the results that come from the exercise. So we're going to look at comparing, if we were doing this with our teams, understanding one another about, well, as a composite, how are we motivated? And this is arbitrary. We're going to look at why did we arrange our motivators in the order that we did, and what were the top 3 and bottom 3. So I'm going to pop another Google Doc. Hopefully people can use this. The edit permissions are turned on this document. And I'm going to share it so I can show you how it works. So stop sharing that. Share another tab here. You can do a lot of this yourself. In the old days, what I would do is just have people put stickies or marks up on the whiteboard, but this is a fancy way of actually summarizing the results. You can see that I've got the 10 motivators down the left of the spreadsheet. And if you rest your pointer on them, you can actually get a little tooltip that's going to come up and tell you what it relates to. So what I would do is I would have people put their initials in a column if they want, or they can just leave it as is. And for the motivators that were your top, like mine was curiosity, so I'm going to put a 1, mastery, and freedom. And my bottom motivators would probably be something like status, I'm going to put a 2, power, I'm going to put a 2, and maybe relatedness. All right, so you get 3 of each. And what you're going to see is as you fill this out, we're going to get radar charts that are going to be built for us dynamically, which show, for those of us that are here today, this is how we feel. This is how we're motivated as a group. We're going to see where are we aligned most on our top 3 motivators and where are we aligned most on our bottom 3. And this is going to give us an interesting point of conversation, because if the radar chart shows, for example, that we've got lots of loops of different motivations, then it might give us a really interesting discussion point. But I can also give you a little bit of advice also on how this exercise can go in an entirely different direction. And it's one to watch out for. If you are if you're doing this with a large number of people who happen to be under different managers in different parts of the organization, and you're just doing this as a fun exercise, be aware that some of the responses you can get, people may try to, if they know it's a visible exercise, may start setting up the responses to align with what they think management wants to hear about how you're motivated. So it's very important to do this kind of exercise in environments where you've got good trust and that you're very clear about how this is helping us understand one another. It's not another tool that's designed to manipulate you and cater to certain behaviors. So we can see that how this is shaken out. I think we've got some responses here. So let's look at this. We can see that definitely curiosity is top here. We've seen mastery is showing up for a lot of folks, as is freedom, and to a very lesser extent, order. You know, somebody deigned to put up the order, and that's fine. I mean, like, that's okay. Some folks feel comfortable with, you know, do I have enough rules and policies around me for a stable environment? That's what I need in order for me to feel engaged in what I'm doing. Now, bottom 3, here's very interesting patterns that are coming up. Power, definitely aligned on that. Relatedness, we don't feel that we need, for example, good social contacts with people in and around my work in order to feel motivated. Now, the important thing is just because it's a bottom 3 motivator does not mean it doesn't motivate you at all. It means that it's all things considered, or all things being equal, I'm less motivated by that. Status is showing up low, which is one that I see quite frequently. And honor, I put that one in, I think. So it looks like that one's low. So you can have a debrief about these results. Now, we're not colleagues or coworkers, so we've got a very random pattern here, but it's kind of interesting, and it may be somewhat psychologically motivated as well by the context and the system that we are in right now. So it's not unusual that we'll get patterns that are interesting, but I wouldn't draw too much meaning into it. This is just a snapshot of us as we're here today. Any questions about what we're seeing so far? Some of the columns, Eric, go off to the right. So we've got 1, 2, 3. I think there's one over here, 4. If you include me, I can see 1, 2, 3. Yeah, way over here, 4. So it's up to people. Like if people are comfortable putting in results, then do. And that's another thing. If you facilitate this with your team, make it clear that you're not obligated. This is just so that you can have conversations with your colleagues and peers about where you're aligned and where you're not. And sometimes it's interesting to talk about why we are all aligned in a certain direction. And is that reflected in the way that we think about our work? Is it reflected in how we're reacting to certain policies and governance? Our attitudes towards change, participating in different change initiatives, inertia, all of these things can come up. And now we've got a vocabulary, if you will, to begin to talk about our similarities and our differences and how they affect how we work. I've used this exercise working with software teams for a good number of years. And I've probably done this, I don't know, dozens, if not, close to 100 times. And most recently, I did it at Balena, where we did it in a very interesting way. What I positioned it as with the employees there, they're an entirely remotely distributed company, and they're very curious people. So I said, well, let's structure this as a mini PDSA. We're going to just dip our toe in the water. And so I asked them to do 2 kinds of responses. First, to organize their own motivators, and then look at what the top 3 and bottom 3 are for themselves, but to make predictions around what did they think overall the company, if we got everyone's results aggregated together, what did we think the top 3 and bottom 3 would be for the company? And then we met about a week later to do the debrief on that, to compare everybody's actuals versus predictions and see how that panned out. And it was pretty interesting because we had some alignment, but where we had differences was actually illuminating. And in subsequent conversations that I had with individuals, one-on-ones afterwards, it was interesting because they would say, well, I saw that the group was going in a certain way, but my personal top 3 and bottom 3, they didn't really show up on the radar graph because there were so many data points, but I'm motivated much, much more differently. I'm not all motivated just like the group. And this is where I caution about the psychology of group dynamics, because you can have, if you show this while people are filling it out, you can create a feedback loop where people just piggyback on it and say, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I'm really motivated this way. So it takes careful facilitation and assurance for folks that this is going to be used only to facilitate a conversation, not to be used as some punitive measure. And even that can send a signal to you, like if you're having to explain how the exercise is used, that can tell you a great deal about the current context that you're within. Any comments on the results or the exercise so far? And how we're doing the summary? Okay. We'll stop sharing this. I'll go back. So Frank has a comment here. As a methodology, I really like this regarding its application to change management. Absolutely. Yeah, seeing how change affects people. It's one of the things that travels a bit under the radar. I think if you read Schultes, he has some advice and guidance around preparation for change and being sensitive to how change impacts individuals. But this exercise makes it a little bit lighter. It's quite approachable. I've done it with leadership and I've done it with teams. So consideration of how a change impacts teams and impacts divisions, departments, it gets quite interesting because you can actually aggregate. You could see if you're clever in how you facilitate this, you could have them doing different moving motivator exercises, answering on a particular question about the change, and then seeing how each department, how are their motivators aligned on this? What does it do to them? Very good. Go back and share my tab. Go back to the deck. So let's go back here. And slideshow back. So some facilitation tips for doing this kind of exercise. It's really important not to rush the delivery. Let folks marinate and cognate on each of the motivators, each of the 10 motivators, and to have conversations with each other about how they're aligning on what they think each motivator means in their context. And as I mentioned when I was going through them, you want to ensure that folks are not just reading the top line label and rushing to say, well, power means this or mastery means this. Carefully contemplate it. You also want to encourage participants not to overthink the exercise too much. It's best to go with gut feelings. So this pattern has come up a number of times when I do it, where people tell me that they are agonizing over moving a motivator one to the left or one to the right, and what does it really mean? And what about the middle motivators? Should they care about them? Again, the interpretation of the exercise is that it's a snapshot for thinking about what intrinsically motivates you at a current point in time. And it's best to approach the exercise in flow. So just go with your interpretation of each one in your context and order them accordingly. And lastly, keep the, well, not lastly, I've got another few points. Keep the focus on the discussion, not the tools. So if you find that the way that you're facilitating is getting in the way, especially with remote teams, try to find simpler ways to facilitate it so that it becomes less about fighting with the tool or arguing about which way or that way that the motivator should be organized. Tips for facilitating the debrief: open the discussion with what you think about the exercise and how easy it was to place them and what people found difficult and why. Sometimes it's interesting to understand, yes, you want them to do it in a flow on their gut reaction, but they may be thinking about something that caused them to vacillate on why they were organizing their motivators in a particular way. And you want to move somewhat smoothly into which top 3 and bottom 3 motivators do we share. So having a quick way to aggregate those results. In the before times, I would just use tallies on a whiteboard. I'd write champ frogs in a vertical line, and people would come up and just mark a tally for which ones were their top 3 and which ones were their bottom 3 in different colored markers or whiteboard pens. So you can use whatever method you think works best for that. The importance is the discussion you're going to have about where you're aligned and where do you diverge, and what do the differences suggest about how we relate to each other. Does it reveal something around, hey, there's a reason why I got my backup, or I became so agitated for during this particular point in time, or when this change was being introduced, and yet everyone else was pretty cool with it. Why did that occur? What does that suggest about what we need to talk about for process improvement? And that flows right into which ones moved up or down when we considered that change. So when you do the up-down portion of the exercise, that's really great for rolling through maybe 2 or 3 different questions and being able to have discussions around, okay, well, where are folks aligned on the motivators that moved upward versus downward? And what does that suggest we need to think about? I'm just going to pause here for a second. So I like what David Schwinn is saying here. I like the way it permits a conversation of intrinsic motivation to go deeper. Right. And this is going to be probably one of the most surprising exercises you'll facilitate with your teams, is that they can take it away. It allows them to be in control of the conversation, and you're going to learn some really interesting things. So as a facilitator, it's the results that you're going to get from this. It's so light to facilitate. It's best when you're out of the way, and the results you're going to get from it are going to be interesting and surprising, even when it seems like they're not. So it's good to get the summary, have the conversation, and then go back and look at it, maybe in a week or two. See if it still holds. Eric, knowing that context makes a difference provides an opening for the frequent use. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so some additional resources that you may want to look at. And I think we're going to provide, I think this is in the worksheet. If you download the worksheet, additional resources should be a slide that is included. So the Management 3.0 website itself, so Jürgen has an element of this for Moving Motivators, which has links to videos talking about how to facilitate it, how to do debriefs, a little more in-depth background on the exercise. There's also a link for using Miro, the virtual whiteboarding tool. There's templates for using Moving Motivators and other exercises that Jürgen has invented. And then there's also this great LinkedIn article, What Still Motivates People When They Are Part of a Distributed Team? Very interesting essay around a fellow who was facilitating this exercise in trying to understand when we're all apart, do we share some of the same motivations? Did they change? And how do we become more aware of that when we're all working? You know, we only come together virtually from time to time and we're working apart. How does that change our motivations? So it's a very interesting exercise in that particular respect. Of course, I will conclude here. Register for fall classes at qualityandinnovation.org. You're likely going to see me coming back with this exercise and maybe a few others because I usually drop in to facilitate or help Eric facilitate some of the classes. So that's me. Questions, comments, and concerns? Yeah, thanks for that. Yes, David. Using this in your organizational behavior course and managing for continual improvement. Yep. Go to the Management 3.0 website. Use the links that are in the slide deck. Facilitate it how you like. I've shown you one way that you can do it, but it generally is simple as this: giving out the 10 motivators and having folks arrange them from least important to most important to them, and then you might even invent some interesting ways to use the up, down, above the line, below the line metaphor. You may find other ways to summarize or facilitate conversations that work with your curriculum.
And just a note, this session is being recorded, so we can provide this, especially the folks who had difficulty hearing portions of it. I see some names here that were registered as a group. Maybe you can leave us your email address in the chat and we can make sure that you get a copy of the link. I'd like to make sure that you have access to everything that occurred today.
Absolutely.
So I'll give you a minute to, if you want to put your email into the chat, I'll give you a minute to do that before we close out the session. Chris, thank you very much for your good work and your contributions. And as you mentioned, you do teach this during the Academy. It's one of the more popular sessions that we have. People frequently make comments about how useful thinking about this and working with Moving Motivators is for them.
Thanks, Eric. Again, if there's any questions, access to the files should still, those links will work in perpetuity. So if you are needing to make, and I think if you want to use the summary file, I would recommend, of course, making a copy of that. Feel free to use it.
Thanks, Neha. Thank you for volunteering to forward this to the rest of the team.
And we'd love to hear how it worked and how you used it.
All right, it looks like that might be it. So thank you everyone for participating today. We are learning as we go through. This is our second opportunity to work with Remo, and certainly everybody who signs in and registers we realize needs to be treated as a first-time user, and we're going to be continually improving our processes here, certainly in the way of guiding people through registration, sign on, and then we're going to look at how we make sure that obviously equipment issues are not the problem for us. I highly encourage you to use the materials that Chris has provided. They're very beneficial, and as Adrian noted, because they're context driven, it's very useful in many different situations. And so the robustness that Chris has shared with us about this tool is worth experimenting with. So please try them out. Stay in touch with us about how they worked and your thoughts about other applications for the Moving Motivators. Thank you, Chris. And thank you everyone for being here today.
Thank you.